Okay, we're ready. So what I want to do is tell you about 9 executives that I've worked with over the last 2.5 years, and I've worked with them to help them get unstuck. So the first slide shows what you say about your job searches. And so I've worked with so many of you over the last couple of years. And then I'm going to talk about what we see about your job searches. And then the third slide is what will help you get from where you are to where you want to be. And of course, that's to land a job. So I've worked with executives in lots of different functions in the companies. I've worked with those in IT. I've worked with operations and supply chain, government affairs, organizational change, technology, data analytics, HR, and business development. So, and then I'm going to wrap up at the end after sharing the 9 success stories, as I'll call them. And then you'll see how they got unstuck and how they accomplished their goals. Okay, so this is the first slide. So here's what you say. If you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, the Executive Pivots program, there's 4 different quadrants. So in the upper left, you'll see needs direction. So that's where it begins, and that's where you determine your position. It's just like you're trying to figure out where you fit in the marketplace and how to differentiate yourself. And then in the upper right corner, it's needs to position. So once you do that, you know where you're going, then you work on your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your bio, things like that. And then the lower right quadrant is needs present. So you need to learn how to have conversations with hiring managers. You need to know how to get interviews. You need to know how to do well in interviews. And of course, you need executive presence, and you need to know how to go about contacting hiring managers to get those interviews. And then the last quadrant in the lower left corner is needs to convert. And that's the point where you're having the good interviews, you've got good traction, and the more you get, it only takes 1 interview to convert to an offer, and then that's what you do. Okay, so this is what we see. What we see, again, in the upper left-hand corner, what you need to do is clarify your direction. You need to figure out how do you stand out in the marketplace, and how do you go about differentiating yourself from competitors that are seeking the same jobs that you're seeking. In the upper right corner, needs to position. So you need to strategically position your professional brand, and there's that word brand. So you need to come up with a brand for you, just like companies come up with brands for their products and their services. The assets refers to your LinkedIn, your profile, things like that. In the lower right quadrant is the needs presence. So you need concise communication and executive presence when networking. So some of you are really good at that. Some of the others, worked with one executive recently. He said, "Oh, I don't have any executive presence." I said, "Well, we're going to have to work on that, aren't we?" And he said, "Yep, I'm ready for it." So, and it really does help. But as a matter of fact, he's currently interviewing. He's got 4 companies he's interviewing with currently, and it hasn't been an impediment so far in his interviewing process. So, but anyway, he's still interested in increasing his skills. And then in the lower left corner is needs mastery of interview and offer conversion. So I hear a lot, gosh, I'm getting lots of interviews, but I'm not getting one to convert to an offer. How do I convert to an offer? So we'll talk some more about that. Okay, so this slide is what your goals are. So starting again from that upper left-hand corner, you want to go from unclear to a clear direction. Obviously, you really want to think through that. And number 2, you want to go from being misaligned to having aligned target and strengths. So some executives are not in alignment with their strengths, or out of sync with their target position. So we talk about that to get them better aligned. In the upper right corner, the next one is weak but strong branded assets. A lot of the resumes that I see are not executive resumes, and there's a total difference between the resumes that have gotten you where you are today and an executive resume that's going to get you an executive position. Next up is uncertainty to a certainty in terms of hiring managers. A lot of folks they can contact HR, they can do screening interviews, but they really don't know how to find a hiring manager and actually set up an interview with them so they can present their case for hiring. Next on the list is some of the executives I've worked with have absolutely no network whatsoever. Many have been in their same position for 30 years, and they just don't have much of a network. And so the recommended on LinkedIn is 500 plus, and so many fall short of that. So that creates Very important need to build a thriving network. Next up, goes from screening interviews to hiring manager interviews. And the more practice you have with hiring manager interviews, the better you get. If you're a little rusty on interviewing skills, there are approaches here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where you can actually practice interviewing skills. And better than reading a book about interviewing is actually practicing it and getting feedback from someone that's very knowledgeable about that. Now I'm going to tell you about 9 success stories. The first one is an HR executive. And in this case, I started off meeting with her and to try to find out what she really wanted to do. And so I asked some of these questions on this slide. There we go. What has been going well in your job search? What hasn't been going well? Who can help you identify leads so you can get interviews? In her case, she had been a successful HR executive for many years, but she wasn't certain what she wanted to do next. And so the company made some changes, and they, moved some divisions around, and her division was impacted. So it gave her a good opportunity to think about it. So we talked about it a long time. She'd been an SVP of People and Culture, was at a global software company. What we had her do is to go through and differentiate herself. How would she stand out? Because I told her, I said, in chatting with you over a number of meetings, from an HR perspective, you are sharper on technology than most of the HR executives that I've met and known and have worked for. Because I'm an HR executive myself. I'm a vice president of HR, worked many years, currently doing interim VP of HR assignments. And so these 4 questions are really good because it helps to differentiate yourself. And so what people want to know when you talk to them and try to go out networking, they want to know, who are you? So they want to know, what is your why? Why did you choose to become HR? Why did you become a financial executive? That sort of thing. So there's usually a lot of interest from people that you're networking with. And then you can tell a couple of interesting personal stories about yourself. That helps to differentiate you from others that are looking for the same position that you're looking for. What have you delivered in your career? That's the impact that you've had on your companies. And then what are you looking for? What kind of positions are you looking for? What size of companies? What industries you're looking for? That sort of thing. Okay, so here's what the slide is titled, An Executive Knows Who She Is and What She Wants. So this is her story. So what she did, she told her story. We also worked with a brand strategist here in the Dallas area named Rachel Tyler, and she came up with a really nice, very amazing PowerPoint presentation. And these are some of the points that she made when she was talking to the Business Navigators, which is a servant leadership group here in Dallas. And so she says up at the top, you'll see, I'm a global HR executive. Okay. And what does she do? She helps companies scale by building people strategies that actually work in the real world. Okay, so that's very helpful if you're out interviewing. She made good use of LinkedIn. She actually posted a number of articles that were really thoughtfully written. She was in panel discussions, and she would have outcomes of those panel discussions on LinkedIn. She also had a couple of good accomplishments that she could tell people, and you'll notice some good metrics in there, such as a 300% revenue growth. And she also improved revenue per employee by 50%, which was a metric that I had not heard of before. But she worked in a private equity-based company, and that was one of their important metrics, and was to grow that. And how did she do that? She tells you what she did and how she did it. She did it by effective succession planning, those sorts of things. And then at the third one, she says what she's passionate about. So when people hear the word passionate, they resonate with that. It's like, wow, if you're really passionate about something and you come in our company, that means you're probably going to do a really bang up job in that. So we're really interested in that. And top of the line is changing HR from a cost center to being a driver of growth, which that's not true in a lot of organizations. So anyway, this was a very well done. Of all the executives I've worked with, she put more focus on determining exactly what she wanted to do, and then telling people that she networked with what that was. And she landed a position here back in October, it was, and she's with a global software company, and she's the vice president of people. So That's success story number one. Okay, this is the color chart. This is one of Brandy Shade's slides. And what it is, it's the strengths from the Clifton Strength Finder. So you'll notice up at the top, you see those three green lines. You'll see up at the very top, you'll see the categories. Purple is, purple is strategic thinking. And so then you've got orange is influencing others. Blue is your relationship building. And green is, boy, the font is really small on that. That's the strategic thinking, all right? And the purple is executing. So my mistake on the colors there. So you'll see he's really heavy on green, and he's got a lot of blue, pretty close to the top 50% marks. So there's 34 strengths. 17 would be your midpoint. And you'll see that orange, which is the influencing others, that is, all of those are below the 50% mark. So anyway, when we started talking, he said, I want to be an account manager executive. And I said, really? And we were looking at this chart. And I said, well, gosh, you look at this chart, account manager executives typically aren't heavy on strategic thinking. At least that's been my experience, and it was his experience as well. I said, why would you want to do that when you want to do something that you could utilize all these strategic thinking skills, which you have in abundance? And so he thought about it. The next meeting we came back, and he changed his target position from account management executive to executive for growth and strategy, while building deep customer relationships. So he still wanted to do the deep, and he's really, really good at that. He's very, very personal, and he's been doing this for a long time. Ran his own company for a couple of years. And so at that point, then he was aligned with his position. And so his target position is, I think it's like account management, strategy, and growth executive. So it turned out really well. And once he got aligned and was real clear on that, it helped out really good. And the reason you want to align your strengths to the target positions is pretty easy to understand, because I've worked with executives before in my past. If you're aligned with your strengths, then what happens is you're more engaged, your promotability is higher, your upward potential is more, and you stay with the company longer. So what happens with executives that come into the company and they're not aligned, and I've had a number of case histories. I worked at Texas Instruments, and I can see that happen. I worked there for 12 years. People that were not aligned with their strengths, they usually, we called it a flash in the pan. You'd see them rise quickly in the first 3 months, 6 months, and then all of a sudden their strengths became less and less apparent, and their weaknesses became stronger, and then they left the company within 12 to 18 months. And so it really does help to make sure that the role that you're targeting is aligned with your strengths. And if you haven't done Strengths Finder, it's definitely a great thing to do. It's like, I think, $20 to get your top 5 strengths. And then if you want all 34 strengths, like this executive here, I think it's like $60. All right, this is success story number 3. So this was an IT executive who became a CIO back in early 25. So we started off our first meeting at Starbucks, like I often do. And his first meeting, he showed me a resume that had about a 1/4 inch margin on the top, bottom, and sides on 3 full pages. And I said, what is this? And he said, this is my resume. I documented everything I've done in my last 25 years. I said, well, you can throw that in the trash basket, because that is not going to get you a CIO job. How committed are you to being a CIO? And he said, oh, it's going to happen. And it eventually did. He did land back in April of 25. So anyway, we had to do a lot of work. It was in late 24. And so he used this example of a resume. This is one that Randy likes to use. It's really, really well done for an executive resume. It has all the information that's needed in the format that headhunters, recruiters, and hiring managers like to see. So we spent a lot of time on it, created his metrics, but he had a lot of problems with the metrics. You'll notice in the middle, the strategic impact. There's lots of metrics in there, but he said in IT, it's very difficult to get metrics, because what you do, the impact is like a couple years down the road. So it's hard to go back over time and figure out what role the IT initiatives had in the business impact. And I said, well, somebody knows. How about a CFO? And he said, I'll try that. So he got with his CFO back at his last company. And the CFO told him, well, of course I know, because I approved all your IT initiatives. And so he got some of his metrics that way. He talked to some of his colleagues at his previous companies. And so they were very helpful in getting him his metrics. So this is the profile on LinkedIn. So what he did, he took the resume. When he got it done, it looked really, really sharp. And then he built a very potent LinkedIn profile. So he has his about section, which is really most of the folks that are in career coaches will tell you the about section is the most important. And so he's got very good descriptors in there about who he is and what he does, what he's known for, that he's a board of directors partner, industries he's worked for, and his certification. So he's got a lot of information in a short amount of time. And then he's got his, I'd call them buckets, but those are your keywords. So technology and digital strategy, AI product development, and governance, for example. Where did he get those? He went out and found the top 10 CIO LinkedIn profiles. And then he looked at what were the keywords for people that are currently in that role. And those are the 5 that he came up with, or 6. And then he mapped his top accomplishments to those 5 keywords. And so it turned out very, very well. He did start getting phone calls from recruiters as soon as this went live. It went live back in January of last year. So he had a really nice LinkedIn profile. He also had a exceptional executive bio. It was the most thorough that I have ever seen, probably better than it needed to be for an executive search. But anyway, he did land as a CIO and started his position in April of 25. We'll move on to success story number 4 coming up. This story was Bob Wyrick, and Bob has used his name in a lot of communications. He was a former government affairs executive with American Airlines. He recently started a new position as managing director of international affairs at Airlines for America. It's in Washington, D.C., but I think he shuttles between Washington, D.C. and Dallas since he lives here. Given that he worked for an airline company for more than 20 years, almost 30, he certainly wanted to stay in the airline industry. So he had very strong written communication skills. One of the days I was talking to him and I said, well, he said, I want to chat with the CEO of an airlines. It's based out in Salt Lake City. And I said, well, why don't you send him a message, send him an email? And he said, well, I haven't done that before. So I showed him some messages that I'd seen executives that had sent messages to CEOs and got a positive response. So he was all up for that. So he did send this CEO a message on a Saturday morning, got an instant reply. And basically he met with the guy for, probably 3, 4, 5 months. And it was a really good relationship, but in the final analysis, the CEO didn't need his skill set at that time because Bob's specialty was working with overseas and building new trade routes for airlines. And so this CEO wanted to keep his airline domestic flights only. So, but anyway, it was a great experience and he learned a lot from having done that. And so it worked out really well. I'll move on with number 5. This is an operations and supply chain executive. So he worked for an aerospace and defense company in Israel for 16 years. Then his company got transferred him to the United States and he moved his family from Israel to Dallas. Quite a move. But of course, he had a very small network when his division went through a lot of restructuring. So he contacted me and said, wow, I have no network at all. So what do I do now? And so I told him, I said, well, you need Tom Jackson is a cybersecurity director in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and makes a lot of presentations to networking groups about how to move things along quickly. And so he shared this a number of times. And what he does is like, he's made 2 successful moves. I talked with him back in 2022 when he moved from Accenture to a company called Digital Management Inc. And since then, he's made another move in 24. So he definitely knows how to do this really quickly. He's really good at this. And so what he does is he finds out the position. He's very targeted cybersecurity director, and he finds openings that he's interested in. And then he finds out who the talent acquisition professional is, who the hiring manager is, and then he make sure that he gets a hold of one or the other of them. If he gets a hold of the recruiting talent acquisition professional, he tries to get the email address, name, phone number, something of the hiring manager so he can contact him as soon as possible and tell him, hey, I'm a great candidate. I can do this job. I'm ready, willing, and able to start now. And so, and then once he has the interviews, I mean, he moves in. And when I talked to him, he had in 2 weeks, he had 6 interviews, he had 3 offers, and he accepted 1. All of that just took 2 weeks, and he was employed in a new company. I've never seen anybody get an executive level job that fast before him or since then. So he definitely knows something that some of the rest of us wish we could do. He's also highly assertive. The way I say it is, I mean, he literally strikes against the company. And a lot of executives I talk to, when I describe what he did, they just say, wow, I just can't see myself doing that. That's just not polite to do things like that. And gosh, can an executive contact a hiring manager like that? Isn't that kind of like invasion of privacy and things like that? It's like, if you hear Tom tell his story, it's like, it works really, really good. And it's certainly not something that is like impolite. Because in a way, hiring managers like it when you take the initiative. And if you find their email address, you can find them out on Rocket Reach most of the time. They view that as like taking initiative and being proactive. So it's a good thing. And they read into that. If you come work for their company, you'll do the same sort of thing. And they like that. This is a story of an executive who had not been interviewing in quite some time. I mean, all of her jobs had literally just come naturally throughout the years, as is the case for many of us, until it just stops. And then like, well, how come I'm not even getting calls anymore? It's like, I've always been wanted. And so Tim Madden, I heard Tim Madden make a presentation a couple of years ago. He's with Executive Career Upgrades, really, really sharp guy with a really great company. He said that 70% of hiring managers know whether they want to hire you in the first 60 seconds of an interview. And they also know whether they want to hire you within the first 15 minutes. It goes up to 90%. So we know as executives when we're interviewing that it's important, but I mean, it just really brings it to light how important it is to make a really good impression really, really fast in an interview. And if you're like some executives I've talked to that haven't interviewed in so many years, like maybe 25 or 30 years, you almost have to relearn how to interview effectively. So one of the best tools that I know of, Jay Fasaro is a speaker. He wrote the book From the Other Side of the Desk. Here are his 6 steps that he communicates to a lot of executive networking groups. And he says that 64% of his clients who follow these 6 steps in this sequence, they land the positions that they're interviewing for. So it starts with what you would think, build chemistry with the interviewer. I mean, that's building rapport. Providing a good answer to tell me about yourself, but not 5 or 10 minutes, like 60 seconds. Because it's really just an intelligence test to just see if you can be succinct. They don't really do anything with the information. It's not of interest. It's just like, can you just be brief and tell them a short story that makes you stand out? And then, of course, a really short answer to why you left your last employer. That's easy for many executives because of restructurings and layoffs and the like. The key important part of the interview is demonstrating competence. And that's where you're telling your story. And he says that 80% of the questions come from the job description and 20% come from the resume. So you have to really get up to speed on what the company is looking for. And you basically want to find out what is their pain point. We hear that a lot. What's going on in the company? So you almost have to do some due diligence and find out through your network or any way you can, some information about what's going on and why that hiring manager is interviewing you, because you're there. It's not about you, it's about the hiring manager and what their need is and how you can best sell yourself and convince that hiring manager that you're better than your competitors to help that manager solve their pain points. And then, of course, toward the end, most of the time in the interview with the hiring manager, compensation is not discussed. That is usually at the very end, or it comes up at the very beginning where, you know, HR will ask you, what are you looking for from a compensation point of view? So we'll get into that on the next slide. And then the last step is demonstrating enthusiasm. So basically, you want to demonstrate that you're excited, that you're enthused, that you just can't wait, that what this company is doing aligns with where you want to go next very, very well, and you're looking forward to coming in and helping them out. All right, this is success story number 7. This is another IT executive. This time, he had done most of the work. I'd worked with him for a couple of months. He had gone through the process very nicely, and he kept having interview after interview. And I said, wow, you're really moving forward. It's just like, you're probably going to land. He said, I keep coming in second place. What's my problem? What am I doing wrong? I said, well, when was the last time you had any practice in building your interviewing skills? He said, I think it was after I got out of college. I said, wow, that's been a couple of decades. You might be up for a refresh. How about that? So I told him about these 2 options you'll see at the bottom. The Pit Crew is the practice interviewing team. These are offered in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're free. And so those are panel discussions. And so the panel gets a copy of your job description and the resume, and then they ask you questions, and then they give you feedback on how you performed in the practice interview. The second option is Walt Glass. He's an experienced executive, and he does it one-on-one. So that's the option that I went with. And I had a person interview me she asked me 12 questions, and then I asked her the same questions back. So, and he gave us like 45 minutes of feedback each. And so he said, Larry, if you think you're going to ace this thing, you are mistaken. And I did not ace it. So it's really good. They give you lots of feedback. And in the case of the IT executive, I said, so what were you not doing right? He said, I was talking way too much. And so everybody gave me the feedback. It's like, dial it back, TMI, too much information. We don't need to know all that. We just need to know an answer to our questions. Okay, this is success story number 8. This was a technology executive. So this is about compensation. So he contacted me. He got an interview with a company here in Dallas. It was a really cool job. But he said he'd never had to negotiate anything or very little over his career, and asked if I could help him. And I said, sure. So as you recall, handle compensation was the number 5 step in the 6-step process. So it's really important. And a lot of executives, we just had it last week, he's getting close to an interview, and HR said, well, I think HR is going to ask me what I want to make. And should I just give them a number? And I said, no, don't give them a number. That's the worst thing you can get. It's just like, well, what should I do? And it's just like, here's the recommended comment if HR asks you what to say. I'm sure if we find this is a mutually beneficial fit, we'll be able to come up with a win-win solution. So, because as we know, as soon as you give them a number, you have just lost your negotiating power. And so that's never recommended to do that. And so there's 2 different approaches. One approach, number 1 there in step 2, it's like if you're asked, what do you want to make? In this case, that's what the CIO asked this executive. And so he called me up and says, well, what should I do? And so here's a sample response. I'm looking for a range in base of 250 to 300K. Where did we get that number? Well, you get that number because you go find out what your position is worth in the marketplace first. And like, where do you do that? That's step number 1. You can go to salary.com. There's other websites where you can get good salary information. You can go to ChatGPT, you can go to Claude. You can also, if you happen to know a compensation or HR consultant, you can get information that way. And so you have to know what your position is worth in the marketplace. Salary.com is usually pretty reliable because I've used it in the past. When I'm working in my full-time positions, normally I have access to data that costs a whole lot of money. And so it is very precise down to the level of responsibility, the number of direct reports, the size of the company, the job title of your boss, all of that. But salary.com is really close and is good enough for this type of exercise. So you can say, here's what I'm looking for base salary. Here's what I want for my bonus. And here's what I'm looking for equity. Now, in this case, the executive, the C-level executive, he had asked for a severance pay because some companies will offer you a severance pay if the position is eliminated. But this executive said, we don't do that at this company, so that's off the table. The other approach is you may get asked, what do you want to make? And so in this one, you can say, I'm looking for a total compensation of, You could put a number in there like 750 or 850, whatever it is makes sense, and include all of the components of the compensation package you want, such as base, bonus, equity. Those are the top three. Severance, typically for C-levels, it's almost always offered. For vice presidents, sometimes it's offered. It can be 6 months, it can be 9 months. I've seen it 12, but more common is 6 and 12, 6 and 9. And of course, plan time off, 401k, health insurance, and a relocation package, if that's available. Relocation is very expensive, and so some companies have cut back in that over the years, but other companies still offer full relocation packages, and a lot of the what they provide in a relocation package is negotiable up to a point. And so they typically make relocation the package based on your unique circumstances, how big a house you've got, how many cars you've got to move, that sort of thing. So anyway, what Jay Fasaro does recommend there in step 4 is if it's not within the range. So if you say 750 to 850 and they just say, oh, you got to be kidding, that's just way too high. So your comeback is, well, then what is it? So they may say, oh, it's 600 to 700. It's like, okay, his response is, if it's lower than your walkaway number, which, it could be, just say, that's fine. I'd love to keep talking about this position. Because his point, and it's well taken, and it works in executive compensation, everything is pretty much negotiable. The few things that aren't is benefits. You'll never get anything on benefits because that's all legal, and every employee has to have the same benefits. But you can, if they only offer 3 weeks vacation, you want 4 or 5. Most companies won't negotiate with you on things like that. Will they negotiate on 401k? Absolutely not. Can't do that. So anyway, his point is, and it's really good, is just keep going because you want to get the offer, and you can always say no. And if they want you bad enough, if you're their top talent and you're their top pick, companies can do more than what they may think. They'll definitely be able to do more than what they tell you they can do, because I've been involved in those discussions many times. But at some point, if you keep pressing too hard, you typically only get one round. You say, okay, I need the following. And if they come back and meet you halfway or 2/3 of the way, that typically ends a negotiation. If you keep pressing for more and you cross a threshold, then what usually happens is they'll just say, you are, the way we used to say it is, you're too rich for our blood. That was the expression we would use. And then the person would walk away. So you want to press, but you don't want to press too hard, because if you press too hard, they can go to their second candidate on the list, and then you'll lose out on. And then once they say no, it never results in a boomerang where they come back. If you just say, oh, well, I didn't mean it, let's back up to the previous offer. I mean, it's done at that point. So they'll move on to the next candidate. Compensation is, of course, the most important part of the whole process. And that's where you want, that's the best part when you get to the very end and you finally close that. In this case, this was the message. And so if you want to know how to write a well-written letter about compensation, this is it. This is the best one I've ever seen in my career. And the technology executive put this together. And so he's got a nice lead-in up there. Thank you for the time. He and the C-level executive clicked early on. I mean, they spoke the same language. They shared experiences. The C-level executive knew this guy could come in there and get done what needed to be done because of such alignment. And so he goes in there, it's just nicely written. Here's what he's expected. He said, I think this can be working out. I'm really particularly interested in equity because of the growth of the company. And it was PE backed. And so it was targeted for very high growth. And he's basically said, but, hey, if you can't make these numbers work, I'm okay with that too. I'm flexible. So if you want to go higher on equity and lower on base, on bonus, but you can see the whole package is about worth about $500,000. And so anyway, the C-level had to meet with HR. It took about a week to 10 days because they didn't even have an equity plan at the company. And so they created one for this individual, and it's sort of a one-off equity plan. It was very unusual how it was structured, but it worked. And basically he got what he wanted, and it took about 10 days, which is about average for an executive compensation, because you've got other players. You got the boss, got the CEO, you've got the CFO and you got the chief HR officer. So you got 4 parties involved in that negotiation. So once that was signed and they went to work, that was back in October of last year. And so it turned out very, very well. Story number 9. Okay. So we've got 2 stories to tell on this. And so you've gotten to that last point. And so you've gotten your offer and you're ready to go. But I've had 2 examples here in the last couple of months where the company, the one that I had most recently was a good example here. This was a tax director, and she's up in New York City on Long Island, and she got an offer last Wednesday for a position as a tax director at a company looking for entrepreneurial tax leaders, which I didn't even realize there was such a thing. When you say tax leader and entrepreneurial in the same sentence, it seems unusual to me, but there are people like that because they're starting a new part of their company. So it was a 1099 position, which that's what she wanted, frankly. And then the next day, she got an offer for a W-2 entrepreneurial tax. So now she had 2 positions. One was a 1099 and W-2. So what do you do about that? And so we spent an hour talking about pros and cons of whether she should take the 1091 because she wants to eventually own her own tax company. And so, and she plans to she's got a CPA, but she plans to get a JD in law. She's already got that on her future plan for 2032. So this is somebody who really knows where they're going and what they're going to do. So anyway, I suspect I'll talk to her again on Wednesday this week. I suspect she'll take the 1099 because that will offer her some flexibility. But a lot of times these positions arise because there's not a headcount approved by the CFO. And so, and they'll just say, well, we can't bring in as a W-2 right now, which is what most of us want. That's standard. But a 1099 is not bad. I mean, I've done it myself here twice in the last 2 years, and I have never done it in my career. All right, so here's the very end point. And so this is wrapping things up for the presentation. So if you do the work that these 9 executives have done, this is what you're going to have done. You're going to have a clear direction. You will know where you're going, how you're differentiated from your competitors. You're going to have an aligned role and strengths, which counts for a lot. You're going to have your strong branded assets, and I can't emphasize the branding part enough, which is very difficult for all of us. Even sales and marketing executives, when it comes to branding themselves, they struggle with it. So we almost always have to have somebody to help us. Rachel Tyler here in Dallas is really good. I'm sure there are other branding consultants that can help creating your own personal brand. Certainty in how to contact hiring managers, because the more you contact hiring managers, the better you're going to get at it. Thriving network, you pass the 500 mark. Hopefully you have many more than that. And over time, if you build good relationships with people in your network, you know, what you do now can come back later and help you in the future. Then you've got a hiring manager interviews, and you, like I said, the more you practice with hiring managers, if somebody calls and said, hey, do you want to interview? Always say yes, because it's going to be good practice for when you get the job that you really want. Even if it's, you know, the judgment call would be if it's a crappy job. I've had one lady last week. She said, this job was just absolutely awful, but I accepted the invitation to interview. She said, I didn't like it, but you know, hey, I hear what you're saying. It's good to practice even when you don't like what they're saying. And then the next stage is you're going to be the first choice. And that's what our objective is, to become the first choice in these interviews. And then we get our offer. Finally, you know, I can normally tell with working executives when you get a momentum going and it's moving in the right direction, and you start having 2 or 3 interviews in a week, I usually can tell that within short amount of time, less than 30 days, one of those is going to convert to an offer. And then the last step is you get hired. Got to go through the background check and all that. You have to deal with HR, go through all those steps, but then you get your offer letter, you complete the background check and all that stuff, and you get hired, and then you start to work. So that's it for the presentation. And so thank you for listening with me this morning. I appreciate everybody showing up. Okay, well, thank you once again, and have a great lunch and have a great week.